Start the recording, please. Great. Great. I will call to order the September 19th, 2023 meeting of the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission. And I'll first run through the script for remotely conducted meetings. And as a preliminary matter, I am Arthur Gasparo, Chair of the Nantucket Airport Commission. We would like to remind all that this meeting is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, convening by video conference via the Zoom app, identifying how the public may join. Please note the meeting is being both audio and video recorded, and all attendees are participating by video conference. Please use care not to screen share your computer. All supporting materials are available on the town website unless otherwise noted. I'll introduce each speaker on the agenda. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps to generate accurate meeting minutes. Please have conversation go through the chair and taking care to identify yourself. And each vote in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. With that, we will turn to the agenda. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns with the agenda as published?
No.
Hearing none, we'll consider the agenda adopted by unanimous consent, and we will move on to the draft minutes from August 8th that were in the packet. Are there any comments or concerns with those minutes?
No.
Is there a motion to adopt the August 8th minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Go ahead.
Made and seconded. Ms. Topham, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. We have to ratify the warrants from August 9th, August 16th, August 30th, and September 13th. Are there any questions or discussion on those warrants or a motion to ratify?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Topham, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Do we have any public comment for items which are not otherwise on the agenda? Not seeing any members of the public in our participant list, and so it looks like we will move on to pending leases and contracts as set forth on Exhibit 1, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Carberg.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I go into this, I wanted to apologize if my posture seems informal. I blew out my knee, so I may be shifting around just to elevate that leg. And I may occasionally pick up my phone and text with our executive session attendee, just to let them know about our pace. So I apologize for those items in advance.
No problem.
Okay, so we have a heavy exhibit. I'm going to try to be brief where I don't think a lot of explanation is needed, but by all means, please stop me if
if I could we share that if possible while we review it on screen?
Yep.
Thank you. Perfect.
Okay, so I have a task order with McFarland Johnson for $6,330 for botanical monitoring in support of our rare species program and grant compliance. I have an additional task order with McFarland for $29,000 for their assistance to design the secure fence move and road move in the bunker area. We have a paper street where the width is not truly functional post-survey, and the tenants can't really get anything around that corner more than a compact pickup truck. I think it's an accident waiting to happen with our fence, and then we have a security and a wildlife issue. It's complicated by buried power and communication cables as well, but I think it will be a good position when it's done. I have a task order with McFarland for airfield pavement markings for $85,100. I want to spend a quick minute on this. You may recall from our FAA inspection that we were written up for airfield markings, mostly on runway 624. We need to address that. We're holding $85,000 in the task order, but as the task order indicates, we really expect to do a direct negotiation with the markings contractor on site already for our taxiway golf project. So the real cost is anticipated at $29,199. I am asking for full approval just in case that doesn't work out. I don't have to bring it back to continue the design to keep that on pace, since we are going to run into a weather stop late this fall to accommodate the markings. We have a separate task order. Is it at the end of the exhibit, Boyana? For the contracted markings? Okay, I'd like to skip ahead to that one because it is related. So the FAA allows an airport to engage an existing AIP contractor that's on site for other relevant work, even if it's not eligible as part of an AIP project. Victor Brandon is on site. They're starting again next week on the taxiway golf project. They already have a markings contractor who will be mobilized to the airports. This contract is a change order to accommodate that work. I apologize that it's late to the packet. That's just what it took to get signatures. It's a pretty substantial amount of money. I think we are in for $719,225. We do have the money available from previous borrowings where we identified that this work was needed. It was brought to our attention via the FAA inspector before we mobilized it independently for a project. So it is work that was planned for, it is work that was budgeted for, and it is safety critical work. So I'm sorry to bring it to you at such a late item, but it's the actual contractor work that goes along with the task order for engineering. So those two items, I will pause. Can I answer any questions about those two?
Any questions?
No,
All right, let's keep going then.
That's not funded, is it? That's all our money.
It's all our money. It's potentially eligible for a Mass DOT ASMP project share up to 80% on a reimbursable basis, but we have to do the work and then apply in the spring for a reimbursement there. It's considered maintenance, and maintenance is not eligible under the AIP program.
Okay, thank you.
We have an amendment for $82,400 to the existing South Apron task order for McFarland Johnson. This is reflective of a 30-day increase in the project duration, and that fee is associated with the increase in required or recommended engineering inspections. We have Amendment 6 to our PFAS task order. This is for the next phase, this fall's sampling work for $82,400. The largest cost item is the mobilization of the third-party driller. And then we have a task order for $20,900 with MJ. This is for inline lightning strike power surge devices. Lightning strikes keep triggering outages and blowing panels at the fuel farm, at the outdoor hold tent, and at remote gates. You can imagine lightning strikes in the summer, busy season, really disruptive. So we've engaged MJ to help us design that inline strike protection. I have $3,200 to $3,220 to amend our right-of-way work for some survey and title work done by Blackwell and Associates related to abandoning Hinsdale and Old South roads. We have our 3-year disaster drill that we call our triennial coming up in April. We want to retain Code Red Consulting to help us administer and run that drill. That's really too much work to be done in-house with staff. We tried it 1 year. Jeremy Souza is a former airport art professional, does a great job. And then we have $56,250 for our annual fuel farm inspections with Mass Tank. These are both required by NFPA and a couple elective maintenance items. Any further questions on Exhibit 1?
no,
Nope. Okay, hearing none, if there's no further questions, is there a motion to approve or adopt the, approve the leases and contracts as set forth on Exhibit 1?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second,
second,
Any further discussion? Ms. Topham, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
aye,
and chair votes aye. Thank you. We'll move on, Mr. Carberg, to the request for comments on the FAA review of the civil aviation noise policy.
Okay, so this is a really interesting item, I think, for both Cameron and me, but the FAA issued a request for comments in their review of civil aviation noise policy. And this topic dominated a lot of the time at the recent AAAE conference. And there are a number of airports who are intent on submitting their own set of comments reflective of their interests and their community interests. This is a different approach from the FAA. Typically, they issue a notice of proposed rulemaking on an item such as change to noise policy, and then solicit comments on the proposed rulemaking. This is very different, and then the FAA seems to be asking its airport and its community stakeholders, well, what do you think we should do? To that point, staff have drafted a comment letter. It's attached for the commission's review. We have a September 29th deadline. So my request for the commission is that they direct a response that they're comfortable with, most likely between staff and the chair, or staff and the commission representatives, so we can meet that deadline. But to set the stage for this letter, I wanted to note two things before I turn it back over to the commission. The first is to have realistic expectations on this effort. These comments are unlikely on their own to generate any immediate or impactful policy revisions at the FAA. Realistically, such an effort, if ever directed by the FAA, is 2 to 3 or more years away, and that outcome is anyone's guess. I like to think that a realistic best case scenario in that future time frame is that a positive change, or a change that we're writing to, would be an increased eligibility for studies. Right now, we cannot answer the questions with AIP funding that we would like to have answered, and those are largely seasonal in nature. And I think those studies may eventually, it's possible to think that they could lead to some increased but very limited local control 5 or more years out. So have realistic expectations about what we can accomplish. But the other sort of bug I'd like to put in your ear is that this is an opportunity to defend the airport, not the airport industry, but our airports and our community's interests. And we're not limited by the scope of current or proposed policy because we're not commenting on a proposed policy. We get to say, well, what do we think the policy should be? So I think we can and should opine on the items that are important to us. And from my standpoint, the commission has consistently endorsed overwater routes and tools for ground noise mitigation. It's always been the idea with the commission, at least during my tenure, that we should be a good neighbor, not to restrict access. And I think that's an important distinction because we're not trying to hurt or limit aviation activity, but rather seek a balance. And as I mentioned before, I won't call out those airports, but we're not the only seasonal resort style airport that is considering taking a similar position and a similar letter. So to those points, we've drafted what we believe to be an aggressive but technically sound set of recommendations to the issues of day-night level averaging, noise metrics, and communication. They're laid out in more detail in the letter. Cameron or I, we can both answer questions at your request. We've drafted as many noise abatement policies. The commission has drafted and directed noise abatement policies as best they can under their jurisdiction. Any further efforts do fall under FAA jurisdiction, and therefore we have recommendations for the FAA to improve their noise monitoring, make locally better informed decisions if possible. So please, that's a lot for me. I'd love to turn it over to you and hear your direction.
Does anybody have any comments or thoughts on the draft letter or the approach that we should take with this?
I don't have any comment.
Likewise.
I appreciate you guys putting this together. I think that this is just the start of what's going to be a many-year process. And, this is even further than I think, I think this is great. I think it gets us in the commenter list and hopefully, participating in the longer term process, because we got in, during the initial comment period. I don't think we'd be precluded further on, but hopefully we are then copied on any, we would monitor ourselves, but also establish line of communication with the FAA in this process. So I'm happy with it the way that it is, or any minor wordsmithing or adjustments that you'd like to make prior to the 29th when it's due. It looks like as of now, I had checked earlier that there's no extensions that they've granted again. So seeing whereas this already was extended from the initial deadline, we certainly should try to get it in, I think, by the end of the month. Anybody else have anything else?
Yep.
So it sounds like that's a go. And once you have a final, I'll be happy to sign that, Mr. Carberg.
Okay, thank you.
Well, moving on to pending matters, and we have our PFAS investigation update. Mr. Carberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would like to introduce Cameron Woods to the commission formally. She will be leading the airport's PFAS presentation and introducing the consultant. Cameron is our new environmental coordinator. I am thrilled to have her on board. She's caught us up in issues of noise abatement, moving us ahead in issues of ESG, and I'm sure she'll gladly take on whatever else we throw her way. Cameron, the floor is yours.
Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. So we have a pretty brief update on PFAS for this reporting period. There is a table update in the packet. The IRA status report 14 was submitted and published by the deadline on August 28th last month. During this reporting period, there was also one soil and groundwater sampling event that occurred, and it took place last week between September 11th and 15th. They were able to get out before the storm, so that was great. The event included soil sampling, shallow groundwater sampling, deep groundwater sampling, and it also included deep temp well utility clearing for a sampling that is going to occur at a later date. A detailed discussion of the sampling performed will be included in the Phase 2 CSA report, which will be submitted on or before March 3rd, 2024. The sampling that took place on airport ground primarily occurred in 3 areas. It was in the vicinity of runway 15 approach, west of runway 24 approach, and in the Bunker Road area, north of ASRE and the Shermney lot. There were also 5 additional soil samples that were collected along Monahanset Road to provide updated results on the private homes in that area. The deep well drilling that we had initially planned to occur next week on September 25th was canceled as it was no longer necessary. And that is it from me. So if there are any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll pass it on to Weston for a more detailed presentation.
Not, thank you very much for that, Mr. Sukop.
Did someone have a question?
I'm sorry, Mr. Buscarin first.
When do we have any date at which the PFAS investigation will end, or is this an infinite investigation?
That's a great question, and I wish I had an answer for you. It seems that the more we pull at a thread, the more we find, and we want to ensure really that we do our due diligence and do a thorough job at getting it done instead of doing a quick job at getting it done. And so I don't have a deadline for you. I don't know if Noah, you'd like to add anything to that.
Sure. I think I'll say we can defer that question to Jim's presentation. He has an MCP timeframe slide, but it's years, not months.
We ready to go?
Yep.
All right. Well, I will try to answer that question. in a limited way. Our investigation of the PFAS contamination is due to be completed by March 3rd, 2024. So that's when our phase 2 report, which is designed to define the nature and extent of the contamination, is due. So we're supposed to be done by March 3rd of 2024, and we are on target to hit that. So that will be hopefully the end of the investigations. That's not the end of PFAS, unfortunately, because once the investigations are done, then we have to figure out what we're going to do to clean it up and what's going to be required to clean it up. And that's that process will be starting. But I do have a slide on the MCP process. We can chat about that a bit more. So everyone can see my slides. Yes. Great. So quick summary of what we're going to cover today: private well sampling, the fuel farm treatment system monitoring that was conducted. This is all work that was conducted since the last time I presented to you folks. We conducted some groundwater and soil sampling at the airport in the spring. As Cameron mentioned, we submitted IRA status report number 14 in August. And then there's some updates on the non-potential drinking water source area and downgradient property status submittals that we've been working on. So let's jump right in. With regard to the private well sampling, we're continuing to do quarterly monitoring of the homes on MVR that are not already connected to town water, to the water line that we installed. There are currently 5 properties down there that are not connected. So we sampled those in May and August, and those results were all below the 20 PPT standard for PFAS. So no new exceedances there. You will recall that on my last discussion, we had sampled property BI, and that one did exceed. Had previously had not, but it did exceed. So that property was connected to the water line in this past spring. So those folks were before they moved in for the summer. So those folks are hooked up. And then the owner of property AW opted to connect to the water line on their own. And that leaves us, like I said, just the 5 properties that remain. On the west side, no additional sampling was collected there. No additional sampling is planned on the west side. All of the properties that had exceedances, with the exception of property IP, have been connected to the municipal water line, either one that was already existing or the one that we extended. And you'll recall that the owner of property IP has declined to connect up to the town water line or receive further bottled water. So we're not going to force him to do that. Moving on to the fuel farm treatment system. So again, you may recall that we have 2 containment structures over there, one for the tank farm itself, one for the truck loading rack that collects stormwater. And that stormwater comes in contact with the concrete of the containment structures, and that concrete is leaching PFAS from years of testing of the fire prevention system associated with those 2 structures. And at a pretty substantial rate. You can see that the influent concentration in our most recent sampling conducted in August was over 2,800 parts per trillion of PFAS 6. Summary of some of the 6 PFAS compounds that are regulated by Mass DEP. So that's a big number, and that's the PFAS that's again leaching out of that concrete. And mixes with the rainwater that accumulates. So the airport staff pumps that water out, and they pump it through a treatment system that Weston designed and helped them assemble. And that is, and we test that system usually every 3 months or so to ensure that it's properly treating the PFAS. And in this case, our most recent monitoring in August, it was PFAS 6 compounds were not detected at all in either the midpoint, so it's between the 2 canisters, or in the effluent before it's discharged into the a dry well where it recharges back into the groundwater. So, so our system is effective at treating even these high concentrations. We are looking at alternatives to this. Obviously, we don't want to do this for the rest of forever. Ideally, we're looking into coatings that we could put on over the concrete to essentially seal it, so that the PFAS doesn't leach out of the concrete into the accumulated water, to date, we haven't found any products that are 100% effective to get to the low numbers that we need to get to. So we're continuing to evaluate that. Obviously, one solution would be to remove the concrete containment structures and make new ones, but that's very expensive. We want to avoid that. Plus, the downtime associated with the fuel farm would be disruptive to airport operations as well. So, not a preferred option for us. So jumping into the groundwater sampling that Cameron mentioned that we conducted. Now, this is she mentioned the work that we completed just this past week. That's not what I'm talking about here. This is work that we completed back in May. This is the work that when I last addressed you folks back in the spring, I was talking about we were going out to do this work. So this is work that has been completed and we have the results back. This work, the groundwater sampling work, focused on further defining the horizontal extent of the PFAS plume. Specifically, there was 5 areas that we were looking at, or that are listed here. But overall, the groundwater delineation is pretty complete. There's a few areas where we've got some exceedances that we're still trying to nail down. But to the again, to the point of the question that was raised earlier, how long are we going to continue to have to do this investigation? I think we are nearing the end. I think we're 90% of the way there. I'll show you this more on the map, but certainly the source of the Stroney lot is we're still chasing that to the north. Again, I'll show you a bit in a map on the map in a bit, and it'll make a lot more sense. Further delineation to the northern plume, further to the east, and the western plume there on Way 15. We did, and Cameron touched on this. We had proposed some very expensive deep monitoring wells that we were going to be installing this past spring and summer. But after consultation with Mass DEP, we were informed that they were not going to require us to do that. The MCP does require us to define the extent of the contamination in 3 dimensions, so depth is a concern. But they acknowledge the hydrogeologic situation on the island, and that the plume is contained to the island, and that it discharges to the Atlantic Ocean. And as a result, and obviously there's a tremendous amount of dilution when it hits to the Atlantic Ocean. So the fact that we've connected everyone along MVR to a water line eliminated that risk pathway. And risk is really what drives them to do these investigations. And they were comfortable with us not having to put in those deep monitoring wells. So that saved, I think it was over $500,000, I believe, in investigation costs. So that was a good savings. We appreciate Mass DEP being willing to work with us on issues like that. So here's the map. I am going to zoom in a little bit, but before I do that, let me point out the general areas that we were looking at. As I mentioned, we did a lot of the work. A lot of our work focused on the Stroney lot, where we were trying to define that source or that northern extent of this. Also, we needed a couple wells here along the east side to define the extent of that. Again, I'll zoom in a minute. And then at the approach to runway 15 up in this area, we had a few more locations up in there to try and delineate or define this extent of the plume here. And then we had a couple locations up in the northern, what I call the northern plume, up by Sun Island. So let's zoom in a little bit here. Take a closer look at the Stroney lot. So these are the points that we installed. You can see that the plume is getting narrower. We've got it down to a kind of a thin tendril. Again, purple is, or just not necessarily again, but to refresh your memories. So yellow corresponds to groundwater concentrations that are less than 20, but above detection level. So we have PFAS, but it's below our 20 PPT Mass DEP standard. Red means we exceed the standard. Purple means we exceed the standards by 100 times, a factor of 100. So the purple are the higher concentrations. And you can see, again, we've kind of narrowed this down to a very thin tendril here, but we still don't have the kind of northern extent of this area defined. So there's going to be more work up in here, but the wells that we did install along here were below, so that was encouraging. We've basically defined that eastern extent now. We've got that locked down. It's just a matter of kind of what's going on up in this area here. And we know literally we've got in green is not, it means that PFAS was not detected at all in groundwater. So we've got clean water up in this area. So we're corralling the horse there. Looking at the runway 15 approach area, we installed these wells because we had exceedances here, we collected these groundwater samples because we had exceedances here that were undefined. We put in these wells and rather unexpectedly, we found some fairly high concentrations up in this area. Not exactly sure what that's related to. And these wells were installed, or these grab samples were collected in an effort to try and define that eastern extent here. Fortunately, that didn't work out for us. So we've got some additional work, as you'll see, planned up in this area to lock in that northern and eastern boundary of that plume. And then lastly, in the northern area, we had an exceedance here, so we installed or collected a groundwater sample. I got to stop saying that. Collected a sample to the east here, and which defines that eastern extent. So that was good. We were trying to define the southern extent of the plume here. We did have an exceedance here, so we're going to step out and collect some more samples here, or we did actually. As Cameron mentioned last week, that work was all completed. We don't have the results yet, but it was completed. So moving on to soil sampling, the only soil sampling we did this past round was on the western side of the airport over by gate 30B. And I'll jump to the map. So this is an area you'll recall that used to receive runoff from the south ramp. It used to run down the access road and kind of go into the gate and pond up on Monahasset in this area and create a puddle. That water contained PFAS, very low concentrations of PFAS, but PFAS nonetheless, and it infiltrated into the soils, kind of contaminating the soils here. So we've been, you'll recall, kind of trying to chase this low-level contamination off the property. We stepped out and did a series of groundwater or of soil samples to the west of the previous round, and we're still finding very, very low concentrations, but unfortunately above the soil standard in the 0 to 1 foot. We pretty much got it down now that this is in the top, like, 0 to top 12 inches of soil. So it's consistent with our conceptual model here that this is just essentially splash over from this puddle. Unfortunately, it's continuing further to the west than we had hoped. So this past round, with this round of sampling, we had kind of exhausted as far as we could go and stay on the town property. We now had to go beyond the right-of-way and into onto private property for this past round. So as Cameron mentioned, that work was completed last week. So we'll get the results back from those, and hopefully those will come back below, and then we'll be done chasing that. The non-potential drinking water source area expansion. I think we spoke briefly about this last time. So the groundwater on Nantucket Island is an island aquifer. It's all viewed as being potable, with the exception of what are called non-potential drinking water source areas. So those are areas under existing infrastructure. So in this case, it was the airport. It's also the downtown Nantucket area is also considered a non-potential drinking water source area. It's areas that are developed where there's likely sources of contamination or possible sources of contamination that are excluded from being a drinking water source, potential drinking water source. So the non-potential drinking water source area that was associated with the airport, or the kind of the default value that was drawn for the airport when Mass DEP first developed this program, is shown here in this purple line. So they just drew this based on aerial photography. There was no site walk, no site investigation. They just kind of eyeballed it. And when they did that, so they didn't take into account the entire footprint of the airport. So, and in addition, it extended into this yellow crosshatched area is the zone 2 or the wellhead protection area for the Wannacomet water supply wells for the island. So the when they again did the default non-potential drinking water source area, they extended it into the zone 2, which you're not allowed to do. So what we are doing is we're going to file a request with Mass DEP to modify the footprint of our non-potential drinking water source area to do two things. A, we want to expand it to match the fence line of the airport. And then B, we want to trim it where it extends into the Wannacomet wellhead protection zone. So that will kind of clean up the GIS mapping that Mass DEP has on file. And what this does is for us is that we don't have to meet the drinking water standards within a non-potential drinking water source area because it's not used for drinking water source. That's the whole idea. So we don't have to meet the 20 PPT that we have to meet in areas off the airport. There's a higher standard that can be applied. So that will help us when we are cleaning up or we have to clean up the groundwater with our remedy for the airport. We won't have to clean the water to as low of a standard on the airport. So that's the advantage for us. So we've collaborated with Mass DEP. We've talked to them about it. We've run this by them. They are on board with it. They're very supportive of it. We have talked with, or NOAA really has talked with the town and also Wannacomet. They are on board with it. They have reviewed our application. They had some questions. We met with them and walked through this with them. They are on board with it, and they have provided letters that support our application that'll be submitted to Mass DEP. So that document is teed up, ready to go. It will be submitted to Mass DEP here in the near future. The downgrading property status submittal. So this is a submittal, and I think we've discussed this briefly. What this is that if you have a site in Massachusetts and you have contamination coming onto your property from another source that's not related to you, you can file what's called downgrading property status with Mass DEP. And what that does is that relieves you of requirements to investigate and remediate that contamination that's not yours that's coming onto your property. So we know that there's PFAS contamination associated with other sources, sources that were identified by Mass DEP when they did their sampling with UMass. They've been collecting samples. You guys are all aware of this. The samples they've been collecting around the island. Some of those have been collected north of the airport, and they found PFAS exceeding the 20 PPT standard. Also, they've investigated cyanide Island fuels, and they've identified PFAS in groundwater at that site at concentrations above 20 PPT. So we know that there is groundwater contamination of PFAS above state standards north or up gradient of our airport. So we wanted to file for downgrading property status for that so that we wouldn't have to investigate that or be responsible for cleaning that up. So we met with Mass DEP in August, and they strongly recommended that we do not submit a DPS or downgrading property status request for that. And they have indicated that their current policy is not to issue DPS if a site has commingled plumes. So in other words, if you already have that specific contaminant on your property, even though it's coming onto your property from another source, they are currently not granting a DPS for that situation. Now, this is different than what they've done in the past. In the past, and I've done this on many other sites, and we've discussed this with Airport Council, and Airport Council has also done this on other sites. This appears to be a policy shift at Mass DEP. It may be related to PFAS and the fact that they're getting a lot of DPS requests on the mainland for different sites. And it may be that this represents a kind of a shift in their policy, that they're not going to approve that. So, but they did say, we voiced our concern that, well, if we don't have that, then you could then require us to, chase that contamination, to define the extent of that contamination and potentially clean up that contamination off-site. And they vowed that they would never do that to us, that they understand that, that contamination is not ours. We have a good handle on what the hydrogeology is, and that with the groundwater flow, and that contamination is coming on our property, and it could not be related to us, and they would not require us to do that. And they asked that we basically explain that in our phase 2 report, which is the summary report that Cameron mentioned, that we're going to be that is due March 3rd of 2024. So that's when we put all of this work that we've been doing into a final comprehensive report. So that we should explain our position there with regard to this offsite contamination, and that in lieu of a DPS request, provide our arguments there. So that's what we intend to do. We're going to hold off on doing a specific DPS submittal and include our arguments in the phase 2. So hopefully that'll get us to the same endpoint with Mass DEP. So again, just to revisit the MCP timeline and kind of touch base on where we are. So the site was initially reported where we first discovered contamination back in March 3rd of 2020. We had 1 year to complete our phase 1 investigation, which we did. We submitted our phase 1 report, I believe in February of 2021. So we met that deadline. This is where we are now, which is the comprehensive site investigation, which we define the nature and extent, we characterize the extent, and we have to do a risk assessment as part of that. We're going to be getting started on that very soon. And again, that report is due March 3rd, 2024. Once that's done, then we turn our eyes to cleanup. And how are we gonna clean it up? So we have 1 year. So between 2024 and 2025 of March, we have 1 year to look at potential options, remedial options. So that's what we're going to be focusing on for the most part in 2024 is what remedial options do we have to deal with the soil and groundwater contamination at the site. So additional steps, wrapping up here. So as we talked about, as Cameron mentioned, we had a fall mobilization that we completed last week. That included groundwater grab samples, again, north of the Stroney lot, north of the North Plume. We talked about on the east side of the North Plume. We're going to be doing some more shallow, where we did some more shallow soil sampling on Monhansett Road over by Gate 30B there. We're also going to be doing some more sampling at the Sun Island area. We are going to be installing some temporary deep groundwater monitoring wells. And I know I mentioned that I said that we didn't have to do the expensive deep wells that we had initially planned to do, and we're not going to do those. What these are rather than permanent wells that require a large drilling rig that was expensive to mobilize and difficult to get FAA approval for, these are going to be installed with the smaller direct push drilling rig that we've been using for the groundwater grab samples, and we've used to install other temporary wells. But we're going to install them basically as deep as we can. And the reason that we want to do this is because it'll allow us to measure the groundwater elevation in the deep portion of the aquifer and compare that to the groundwater elevation or head, what we call hydraulic head, in the shallow portion. And by comparing the water level in the deep and in the shallow, we can tell if the groundwater is moving vertically upward or vertically downward. And our conceptual model is that at the north end of the airport, up near the center of the island, you have downward vertical gradients. So the groundwater is, you've got a lot of rainfall falling on the island that it's infiltrating, and that groundwater tends to move downward and towards the ocean. And then as you get towards the ocean, it starts to move back upward. So we're expecting to see downward gradients at the north end of the airport and upward gradients at the south end of the airport. And we're going to use that as part of our argument for not having to do the deep wells, the expensive deep wells that Mass DEP said that we didn't have to do. So they said as long as we can show that we have a good understanding of the vertical flow paths, we don't need to install those expensive wells. And then we've got a couple of MCP filings that we talked about. We're going to get that non-potential drinking water source area expansion request. That's going to be submitted here in the next couple of days. The next IRA completion or IRA status report is due in February 2024. We expect to have a completion statement along with that to close that out. And then the next, the big kahuna, the phase 2 comprehensive site report is, as we talked about, due in March. This map just shows the kind of the locations of the sampling that was completed last week. So again, targeting some additional soil sampling here, some soil sampling up in the Sun Island area, and then some additional grab samples to try and hone in on that that residual contamination we don't have fully defined yet. And that's it.
That's it. Thank you very much. There's a great amount of information, and clearly you've been very busy here. Mr. Buscarin.
Yes, it seems like after March of 2024, we're into a remediation requirement. And it seems to me that knowing nothing about this, there's nothing we can do to remediate this other than flush the soil out with clean water, or we could take Nantucket and distribute it into the Atlantic Ocean. So what's your anticipation on the cost and extent of any remediation effort?
Our expectation is that because we've mitigated the risk here, and again, risk is the big driver for Mass DEP. We've mitigated the risk by connecting everyone up to town water. So I know that was expensive, but that really, in my eyes, was our remediation, if you will. So we don't have risk anymore. So our expectation is that we're going to do what's called monitored natural attenuation, where we're not going to do active remediation. We'll just monitor the PFAS levels over time. And you're right. That's basically exactly what's going to happen is the natural precipitation will flush the remaining PFAS out of the aquifer over time. You know, we have mitigated the sources. We've stopped with the fuel farm treatment system. That's been key in mitigating an ongoing source. Exhaust to the groundwater.
One more question.
Yeah.
I don't know, we will have spent more than $8 million on investigating this, which is of course an unfunded mandate by the state EPA. It seems to me that we ought to write them a letter at some point, and I don't know what Jim thinks about this, or if anybody else has done this, but what about asking for some reimbursement? This is all our own money. This is the FAA is not paying for any of this. This came out of our hides. And I'm wondering how they would react if we said, what about some reimbursement? Since we were good people and did what you said.
Mr. Capo and Mr. Carberg. Mr. Carberg, your hand is up.
Yeah. Jim, would you mind if I took that one?
Oh, please.
So, while I agree with the cost and the disruption, Mr. Buscarin, I think the most effective strategy, which is what we've been doing, is to take these costs into account and we recycle them back into our rate base. We have to make a philosophical decision. We have this legacy contamination because of the ARP services that we're required to have to support air carrier aviation. Most likely these are costs that we need to reassign to those aspects in the long term. The commission could also take the position that most of our alerts and incidents are responding to GA aircraft, so we should assign that some portion of our rate base to our general aviation operators and have those more powerful entities carry the fight for us for cost recovery and reimbursement to their appropriate lobbyists and delegations. On your previous question, I did want to mention early on in our investigation, probably 3 or 4 years ago, the commission directed to install a water line, install water services. And we took this argument directly to FAA. We were one of the first airports to do it, to make an argument for using airport revenue. And that strategy has paid a lot of dividend as we work with the DEP now. And we see that now in not having to take on, it's not so much a cost effort, but it was a major airport disruption to do the deep well drilling. when we have the ability to entomb soil as part of the berm adjacent to the south rim. Those are all down the line cost savings that result from the position the commission took 3 or 4 years ago.
Thanks a lot, Noah.
Anybody else have anything further on the investigation? Mr. Marks?
Okay, I just had a question regarding the fuel tank farm and the sealing the concrete and stuff. I was curious what type of materials you've looked at. If something like, I know we use a lot of things to seal foundations here that are waterproof. Pass the code for such things. And if something like that would work, I'm not sure what the level is that you're looking for. Just curious if the concrete's porous and if you sampled outside the wall to ensure that it's not migrating through the wall and then contaminating again that way. And then I was just curious about the disposal of the activated charcoal in those canisters. Like, what's the process for that? And if you had any problems getting rid of that, because I've heard that that has become a problem.
Yeah, well, let's start with the first question. I'm sorry, I'm responding to that, right? Okay. Yeah, the first question, yeah, so we're looking at a variety of resin and epoxies, different epoxy coating and resin coatings that will, so essentially, yeah, exactly that to seal the concrete. Unfortunately, the testing that's being done on those is showing that the PFAS is still able to break through. It's still able to leach through those coatings. So we haven't identified anything yet that that can meet the standards that we're looking for. So you know, that's not to say that I mean, maybe we use one of those products and even though it still leaches through at such a low rate that it reduces our O&M cost, and that may still be cheaper in the long run than you know, replacement of the concrete if we can't find anything that can meet the low standards that we require. So so that's an option. But the you know, your question about is it migrating through the concrete? We don't allow the water to really sit in there that long. So the expectation is that it's leaching out and it's not leaching all the way through. I think it would be a concern if that was full of water and stayed full of water, and you've got that head that could, you know, like you said, drive it through that porous concrete and come out the other side. But the fact that the airport keeps on top of that and keeps it pumped out really prevents that, I think, from happening. I think you had a third question. Oh, the cost of the disposal of the yes, and Noah maybe and Cameron might be able to shed more light on this, but yeah, so we've changed that out. I believe it was about a year and a half with the first resin and carbon that we used in that, or I think which straight carbon that we used in that before we saw a breakthrough and it required to be replaced. But yeah, I know that. Getting Clean Harbors to take that offsite was a challenge for the airport.
Anything further, Mr. Marks, or does that address your question?
Yeah, so just, I guess I was curious, like I said, about like that foundation stuff we use, right? They make these foundations like boats, you know, you can, no water at all gets in them. I'm just curious and they're rubber based, and I don't know, well, I believe they are, right? They have membranes and they seal them up, and then they don't leak. I'm just curious if you've investigated anything like that, or if maybe those products are part of the problem, because I'm not sure what the PFAS is or is not, you know, in anymore. So just curious about that. Marflex, I think, is one of the things they use. I know one of the local guys uses a rubber membrane and they seal it all up. And like I said, those things are under hydraulic pressure and never leak. The basements don't leak. That's all.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the information. We can we'll look into those.
And I think on that same, not to go too far afield, but I mean, there must be the membrane that, and Mr. Lasden, maybe you have some of this that we've been looking at as part of the remediation pile. I would think must be non-permeable to those PFAS molecules, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, I guess the hard part here is that it's, you do have the tanks that are sitting in the structure. So I did have to remove the tanks and because that's to be, that's why we're kind of looking at like a paintable coating or liquid coating that you apply, because you could basically paint that around the existing infrastructure that's in those containment areas.
Right, like the Marflex that Mr. Marks referenced. I see.
Right. Right.
Okay, anything further? So we'll just be looking for our next update would be the next quarterly that we do, or would we be having something before then?
We can ask for I forget the term that we called it, but it's a
Interim,
quarterly regulatory update. Otherwise, it would be 6 months, I believe, for the next IRA update. Is that correct, Jim?
Yes. Yeah. It would be 6 months. So basically, it would be spring at that point.
right, but I think we would get an interim, non-official, sort of was the way we had been structuring it, or at least I hope you don't have to go through a presentation nearly as in depth of what you did, but I think it would be good if the commission could have an update, halfway in between there and that 6 month.
Cameron and I will follow up and we'll plan the interim status update for January timeframe.
Yes, whatever you think sounds right. Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else have anything further on the topic?
No.
Okay. Moving on, pending matters, Mr. Carberg crew quarters project.
Okay, and with your permission, Mr. Chair, Cameron and Jim are welcome to stay on. But with your permission, I'd like to give them the
Certainly,
opportunity
you guys can
to go home if they'd like.
certainly. Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Well,
much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you very much. And a special thank you to Ms. Topham for telling me last time how to say
How
the
to
Stroney
pronounce
lot without the J. Just ignore the J. That was a great tip. I'm
Good.
no longer ridiculed by my colleagues. So thank you very much for that.
You're only ridiculed by me, possibly. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the crew quarters project, I have Bill Cox in attendance from CHA. He will be available to answer any questions you would like to direct to him or to me. But in your packet, I've included the architect's submission to the HDC. I appreciate the HDC's review. Their first review took place on July 25th, where it was well received. I think we took away some very reasonable feedback on minor architectural elements and a shift in the site plan. We've also reviewed the site plan with the fire department, and they've approved the current layout on September 12th, which we accommodated and put back into our resubmission for the September 12th HDC meeting. Unfortunately, that meeting timed out before they got to that agenda item. I understand that they're in session now. We're on their agenda for tonight, possibly even right at this moment. Our architect will be in attendance there. So our goal is to still receive bids, then release the bid package for the general contractor and have that information inform our additional borrowing needs at special town meeting. We are waiting to receive the bid prices for the modular units. We'll open proposals, I believe, on September 20th. We did push this date back once due to an accommodation. We had to change some of the technical specs that we issued. And it's always a judgment call in that case. I know we're under pressure to meet a deadline for next year, but I really felt pushing this back was needed to ensure quality bids and bid competition on the modular units. We're also coordinating sewer, water, and emergency access with the appropriate town departments. We found out that the sewer line does not go as far north on Nobody Farm Road as we had assumed from the GIS. So we'll have to take on responsibility for that extension, which we'll do. That is my update. Are there any questions for us on that item?
Yeah.
Oh,
Nope.
thank you.
Keep us posted.
Thank you. On the South Apron expansion project, I won't belabor the point, but we had the special commission meeting on the 14th to ratify the $29 million grant to fund the project, and we've made the award to Robert B. Auer. Our intent, I believe, is still to begin initial site work late this fall, early this winter, pave through the summer and complete by fall of 2024. The interesting part that I find about this project is that we're managing this project for the most part as a landside project, so we will fence it off. So the contractor can enter as they please from the construction gate. It's a non-secure project. We reduce the likelihood of any airfield incursion. And we can do it quickly instead of breaking it up into phases. As an outcome of the master plan meeting, we also had an interest from the neighboring association about the project. We had a really good detailed one-to-one meeting with them earlier today to review those plans, positive outcome. So happy to do more of that going forward. Any questions on the South Round?
Likewise, I would say please let's keep us posted and keep this sort of as an update per meeting.
Great. I have 3 grant awards for the commission's ratification. I was going to take all 3, one after the other.
Yep.
We have a second grant for the South Apron. This is our BIL, the building infrastructure law portion, which accumulates to airports similar to entitlements. So it's a separate grant. It's for $2.8 million. We also have AIP 83. This is the portion of the reimbursable agreements. We're taking on work to relocate the fiber optic cable to the ASR 9, the big domed radar, and determine and terminate a copper cable that the engineer found on the project site. It's its own grant because we administer it a little bit differently, but it's still funded according to the AIP splits. So that's for $133,000. And then we have $869,000 for ARF vehicles and equipment. This is both for the new ARF truck we will use to meet future Index C requirements and the equipment that goes on board that truck, the tools, the radios, the rescue equipment, things like that. So I think we'll need a motion and acceptance for those 3 grants.
Is there any questions on the grants?
No.
If not, is there a motion to accept AIP 82, 83, and 84?
So
I'll
moved.
make that motion, a second.
Motion been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Ms. Topham, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Aye.
the chair votes aye. And moving on to the memorandum of agreement approval, Mr. Carver.
Okay, I have good news that we have a new 3-year agreement with our labor union. I wanted to thank the union team for their professionalism throughout the contract cycle. We can have differences of opinion, and I think we both met them very well together. We did have some transmittal issues. The original packet contained a signed MOU that had skipped some pages. We since updated the full MOU via handout. The major negotiating point on the contract was wages. I know we weren't alone in this. At the end of the process, we agreed to a base wage adjustment of $2,500 and 5% increase in year 1, a 5% increase in year 2, and a 4% increase in year 3. And that year 1 adjustment is retroactive to the new contract beginning date, which is July 1st of 2023. The item in your packet is the MOU, and the creation and signature of the final contract is a couple months down the line. However, I spoke to Labor Council and we can move forward with the signed MOU that we have present.
Is there any questions on the MOU?
No.
Is there a motion to ratify the memorandum of agreement?
I'll
So
make
moved.
that.
Oh,
Motion been
Second.
made and seconded. Any further discussion? Ms. Topham, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
aye.
the chair votes aye. And that moves us on to the non-union employees COLA discussion.
Yeah, so the practice is for the airport manager to come to the commission following the resolution of the union contract to ask for the same raises for their administrative staff. So I'm here to ask the commission to approve the same COLA methodology that I mentioned previously for my administrative team. And that's the 2,500 and the 5% and the 5% in year 2 and the 4% in year 3.
Are there any questions? And for clarity, that would be everyone except for the manager, and we'll discuss that at the next meeting.
That is correct.
Is there a motion to approve the COLA adjustment for the non-union employees in line with what was just adopted for the union?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. Ms. Topham,
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. And that moves on to the declaration of surplus property on Bunker Road. Maybe we could, if it was easily available, maybe we could have that exhibit map up. That might just help everybody understand where we're talking about, please.
Boyana, would you be able to do that, please?
Thank you.
And while she's bringing that up, thank you for your action on items 8 and 9. I know they're much appreciated by staff. Okay, the declaration that we have before you is, again, we released a declaration of surplus property before putting out an RFP for land. This declaration is specific to a very small portion of a lot in the bunker area that we have not leased previously, but it's intended to be leased in conjunction with another piece of property. I did want to mention both, but I'll take the declaration first. So the declaration is specific to this 4,167, give or take, square foot area of land at 33 Bunker Road with an appraised value of $2.50. This area contains a scrap metal pile and a couple abandoned vehicles on this location. The airport's intention is to release this parcel for rent combined with the adjacent parcel. It's empty now. It was previously leased by National Grid with a term that expires at the end of October. That parcel had been previously declared surplus and rented, so it does not require a declaration. Together, we plan to release the full lot, the previous NGrid lot, with this lot together in the same issuance for a single tenant. But I'd like to negotiate a lease abatement for the 4,000 square foot property where that land is credited for a number of months to be determined in exchange for that tenant lawfully disposing of the junk pile. And that's something we could address via lease language with council. I think that's a much more efficient and use of our time in a business-friendly way to, hate that metaphor, but kill two birds with one stone. So declaration is one issue, but I did want to review my strategy for that parcel as well.
Are there any questions about this approach and or motion to declare the 4,100 the described parcel as surplus?
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Marks, did you have a question?
Yeah, just about the disposal of all the scrap metal. We have a tenant that does a good job of taking care of a lot of the scrap metal on the island. He lives across kitty corner from that, Scott Bamber. He may be somebody willing to just go in there and get rid of it for you, and because he trucks so much, it helps him when he's going back to take something back with him. Just a thought. And if you approached him, maybe he would just get rid of it for you.
We'll investigate that because we don't need to take any immediate action on encoding the approach I detailed now. So we can reach out.
Okay. And so we had a motion. Was there a second?
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. Ms. Topham,
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Aye.
the chair votes aye. Thank you. Mr. Carberg, the annual report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. The annual report that I have in the packet is a written departmental summary that appears in the ATM book that most of us receive at actual town meeting and pick up and look through. It's an annual item, but it hasn't been brought to the Airport Commission before, and I wanted to provide it here for your visibility. In past years, staff have written this report without commission discussion. However, this year I've made significant alterations. Most notably, this is the first year I'm aware of where transient general aviation operations are now our majority operation. And this has a lot of implications for the airport. I've reflected it in the report with my language. I'm not necessarily seeking approval from the commission before submitting my copy to the town, which is due on October 2nd, but it is new, it is different. So if there are concerns with the format or the messaging, I wanted to give the commission the opportunity for that discussion.
Anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns about the report? Looks good.
Okay.
And then the next item was to discuss in-person, hybrid, and remote meeting alternatives, Mr. Carberg.
Okay, so we've had this item on the agenda previously, and to guide your discussion, we are currently Zoom only. We did have one hybrid meeting recently in the past several months in the trailer. That same spot in the trailer is available for further hybrid meetings in our time slot, but our 5 p.m. second Tuesday of the month time slot is not available at the 4 public safety facility due to a conflict with another board. So our options are that we can continue to meet remotely as is. We can meet in a hybrid environment in the same date and time, or we can research and determine a different date time for the 4 public safety facility space. But those spaces do tend to be limited. There's a lot of demand for them. Staff, we defer to the commission. It's your meeting, but we do have 2 requests. We do like having a remote attendance option for consultants and other visitors to reduce their time and travel costs. And if we do move a time and date, that we would allow for an additional month at our current date, just for staff to sort of reschedule their changes, childcare coverage that honestly has become pretty standard for the second Tuesday of the month at 5 p.m. So with that, it is your discussion and your direction.
Thank you. Commissioners? Mr. Buscarin,
Well, I recently tried to Zoom into a planning board meeting and found that the Zoom didn't seem to work, although I'd registered for it. And I had a couple of neighbors that had the same issue. I think as a public board, it's nice to have an in-person aspect to this because it's difficult for people that don't have, computers and don't know how to register for these things to access the meeting. On the other hand, I think it's invaluable to have our consultants appear via Zoom. The last thing I want to do is incur more expense by flying people out to the island. So, although I think I would be in favor of keeping our own slot and go to a hybrid meeting, but I'd like to hear what other people have to say in the commission.
Commissioners?
I will not be able to drive in the dark after 6 o'clock or 6:30. So I can get somebody to pick me up, I guess, in my family and drop me off. That's my tie back.
Mr. Carberg, are you aware of anybody having any challenges with joining our meetings?
I haven't. I think Boyan and Billy do a really good job.
Yeah, sure. Anybody?
They engage the members of the public and have helped them along in the past. So credit to them.
Mr. Marks?
Yeah, I think like most of our stuff, there isn't a lot of public input, and whenever there's been a requirement for that, like with the taxi thing, and then we just had a public meeting so they could all be there and not have to deal with Zoom. So I think we can accommodate both, and I think this is a little bit more convenient. Either way, I'm whatever way we decide, it's fine with me. But I like the idea of the remoteness, and I think it's helpful to at least one of our commissioners. And not that it would be insurmountable, of course. We can help get her home, but
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm hearing is we all would rule out in person only, and the decision is really whether it's hybrid or just remains remote. I do see a bit of a difference with our commission and regulatory or permit issuing boards, such as the Planning Board and Conservation Commission. And I liked the suggestion that had been made by, I believe it was Mr. Flaherty, that, you know, if you're having a public hearing or you have some particular topic that you would expect generates, you know, public input and comment, then maybe do that one as hybrid, and we always have that as an option. I'm happy to do either as well, though I think this is working pretty well and would be fine with it remaining. So, Mr. Viscarin, you sort of put it forward. I mean, you feel strongly, and it sounds like if we went to hybrid, we would then have we would also have a hybrid commission that would be split, so that, you know, Ms. Topham might, for some of those meetings, stay remote.
I think you make a good point that unlike, say, the planning board, which of course involves a lot of people who have personal interest in moving things forward, our issues tend not to be, so it doesn't affect the population so much. So you know, it's very convenient to do Zoom. I like Zoom. I like staying at home. I don't need to drag people out in the middle of the rain, and certainly some members of the commission would be inconvenienced by driving around after dark. So I'm happy to stay with Zoom. I had an experience with the planning board, which was very poor. I was on the phone with somebody there. They could never get the connection made. So I found that was very poor, but we don't have those issues. So I'm happy to stay with the Zoom operation.
Maybe we revisit it in 6 months, or perhaps for the next commission appointments. It might be a good practice as each commission gets reconstituted, generally speaking, to put that forth to that, you know, sort of newly constituted commission each time for them to consider and have that discussion. I think that might be a good practice.
Agreed.
That first meeting in July, it would be part of the, you know, or maybe one after, something like that. Okay, it sounds like unanimous consent. We'll keep things as they are. I do think it's good discussion to have as well. Manager's report, Mr. Carberg.
Thank you. On the project front for Taxiway Golf, we begin that project next week with survey and work preparation. We'll have an alternate gate tug-in, tow-out procedures beginning October 1st. We mentioned utilizing the contractor for markings. We're having a similar discussion to see if we can accommodate work to increase the footprint for a gate hard stand. I don't have anything formal about that, but that's I have a pin in that one potentially for next month's meeting. For the airport master plan update, we held a hybrid stakeholder review meeting on August 23rd. I wanted to thank our Chair Gasparo and Commissioner Buscarin for their attendance and participation. This is the first of our 3 stakeholder team meetings. We will also have 2 open house events. Thank you again for everyone's involvement. I think we had a good presentation and discussion. I think the master planning group well understands the issues of the terminal area, forecasting, and facility needs. It's no surprise to me that noise and environmental concerns are the focus. Environmental concerns being broader than just PFAS, lighting, as well as general sustainability concepts for importance. We will, for our next meeting, which is to be scheduled, complete the facility requirements. We'll schedule our first public workshop, submit an interim report, and develop some alternatives. We look forward to scheduling that and continuing the process. I have no update on the geometry projects. We previously discussed the southwest ramp. My update for the terminal optimization is that we're eagerly awaiting the scope. Thank you for ratifying the ARF truck grants. I'll have this item sit on the agenda and it'll be here for 12 to 18 months while we work through, the delivery backlog. Our non-AIP projects, no update on our hangar development. Bringing you up to speed for our GA tenant hangars. I've had exchanged a series of emails with our general aviation tenants, our common hangar general aviation tenants. We've had some issues with ramp rash. We are, as far as I can tell, the only airport that I know of that's not a private FBO that owns common use hangars for multiple aircraft. So that raises issues of liability and responsibility for moving aircraft in and out at a timely basis. I'd characterize that we're having good conversations. We're trying to find solutions that involve the right combination of notice, keeping our rates down, oversight, and liability. We're not there yet, but we're working on it. We'll continue to do so. For right-of-way research, that remains in progress. I'm going to direct our consultant to memorialize where we are on the issues of closing out the paper streets that cross the airport. There's a long and expensive sort of investigation and title process effort that isn't necessary in the FAA's viewpoint. It's something we could currently do, but it would be outside of our current scope. So I'm going to move to memorialize it and move ahead. For our fence relocation, thank you for approving that task order. We'll move forward to finalize options and discuss with our affected tenants. For our RFP and bid status, automatic doors is in process. We're just waiting for a signature on that. South Apron expansion project, we awarded the contract to RBO. We'll bring that to a future airport commission meeting, but this is when items really start to get moving on the project. So it's a real project now with the grant award and with the contract. Our truck equipment I mentioned, our vehicle I mentioned, RFQ for terminal optimization I mentioned. The RFP for lots 77 and 79 in the bunker is available to the public with proposals due on the 26th. These are small lot portions that are located to the east of the existing Island Barge and Toscana leaseholds. The RFP for the impound lot and surface storage facility is available to the public. Proposals are due on the 26th. This has generated a lot of interest. So I hope we have a number of reviewable proposals at the end of this. Let's see, I mentioned the IFB for the modular building contractor, and we are currently seeking quotes to install isolation valves for chillers 3 and 4 of the geothermal system. Those quotes are due on October 4th. Boyana, while I'm speaking, would you mind bringing up the CIP and zooming into, I think, federal fiscal year 25?
I'm going to ask just a quick question before you go to that.
Of course.
The GOL that you mentioned, is that going to fix the problem with the spillover to the exit way?
That's a good question, and I don't know that answer. I'll find out.
Okay, just curious. Thanks.
Okay. I'm sorry, Boyana, 2024, please. Thank you. So what I have displayed before you and is in our packet is our CIP, or our capital improvement plan. The CIP is an important tool for the airport and FAA to understand system-wide requests that are coming out of airports. Like any long-range plan, the longer out you look, the less clear it becomes. The feedback that I've heard from the commission in previous years is for a little bit more visibility on the future CIP. So that is why I have it here for you today. I'll caution you not to take any particular project or year too seriously, as this is still a draft prior to our meeting with FAA and Mass DOT. And of course, FAA not only holds the purse strings, but they hold the regulatory authorities. So in my experience, every year this does change after the FAA meeting. But it's worth looking at briefly, even at the staff version, to be sure that we're meeting the commission goals. So that I just wanted to go through 2024 in particular. There are 7 items I wanted to call out. We have potential environmental permitting update based on any projects that come out of the master plan process. We have continued permit monitoring. We have the runway 24 high-speed exit taxiway. That's our most critical project. I think it's both a benefit from the capital investment to increase airfield operations, but if you reduce emissions and taxi time even a few seconds on 50,000 operations, this is a really large cumulative impact. Air traffic also has it as a priority project, so I think it's a good win-win-win to pursue for that year. And then we have runway 624, the center line rehab. It's a pavement joint. It's covered by crack seal now. It's beginning to deteriorate. So we'd like to identify a mill and overlay for that project to increase the life of the runway. And those would be our AIP projects that we take into our FAA meeting. The rest of the projects, not being AIP projects, tend to generate, less discussion and more local election because it's our money. Well, I guess we have bill funding on here for design for our phase 1 terminal improvements. Bill funding is available. So if we can use it to pay some of the design costs, we may do that. We'll have additional airfield remarking. A few years ago, we were written up by the FAA. You can only have so many layers of repainted markings before you need to grind and reapply them. So we're holding money for that. It's listed as dormitory construction, but it's the potential phase 2 build of our employee housing. And then some additional airport projects that we're putting in here that the commission certainly will have more discretion to direct on. Are there any initial questions on the CIP or the CIP process that we undertake?
Anyone?
No.
Okay, to continue my operations update, thank you for the approval of the markings work. That really helps us with the FAA inspection. Fuel supply, we finished our season without any further supply disruption or limitation. We've set a meeting with our fuel stakeholders, World Fuel, Steamship Authority, Noonan for November to review logistics. And we're working with World Fuel now to submit our next year's boat reservations. I'm also negotiating our new fuel supply contract with World Fuel directly. Ramp capacity, we had some challenges in September and Labor Day weekend. Staff handled them very well. We didn't close runway 1533. We worked through it. For Hurricane Lee, we had disruption as we took the hurricane very seriously. We took down the secure tent fabric, which impacts our hold room capacity. There were some canceled flights. All credit to staff who were able to put this up and have the tents back and running by Monday AM. This was a really, really dedicated and great job by them to minimize disruption to the public. So thank you to Gary Allen for leading that effort and Rob Holgate for coordinating. For summer 2024 air service, I wanted to make a couple informed predictions. American and JetBlue had been operating what was called a Northeast Alliance. This fell afoul of federal antitrust regulations, and they will not be carrying it forward. They were code-sharing flights, so instead of both airlines operating a LaGuardia flight out of Nantucket, JetBlue only operated a LaGuardia flight, and American Airlines would book their passengers on that. Nantucket was a big beneficiary of this because we had fewer operations, less congestion, but we still serve the same number of passenger enplanements, if not slightly more. There were other routes where this benefited the airport. But with that alliance going away, the likely outcome is that each airline adds a couple more flights in season, which is going to make things incrementally more difficult on us. Delta, I think, also did very well, and I think United may consider more routes, or my personal hope is that they consider the return of the Dulles Airport route. Either way you slice it, my forecast is for increased air service and number of operations next year. I attended the AAAE NAC conference recently. A lot of focus is in the industry right now on the fluorine-free transition planning effort. As recently as I think 3 days ago, A fluorine-free foam is now on the qualified product list and available for airports to purchase. This does not mean that there are hundreds of thousands of gallons of foam currently manufactured and available to ship within a week, but airports can start getting into line. There are a lot of things that come with this. Our firefighters have to train to fight fires differently with this foam that behaves differently. Existing trucks that have AFFF need to be decontaminated because these products do not mix well. They form a gel and ruin the truck. So while we will take that new ARF truck delivery with fluorine-free foam, we have transition planning we need to work through before we convert existing airport. And then noise policy and TSA aviation screening were all important topics. Moving into statistics. For July, total operations were down nearly 12%. Southwest ramp ups were down 6%. Enplanements, however, were up 2%. That's an increased load factor and increased efficiency. In the Boston market for July, Cape Air was down 18% and JetBlue was up 25%. For Charlotte, American was up 19%. In DCA, Washington Reagan National, JetBlue was down 22%, was made up by American being up 16%, part of that Northeast Alliance. New Bedford on Cape Air was down 31%, United was down 3% in Newark. In White Plains, JetBlue was down 23% for July. Cape Air Hyannis for July was down 48%. In the JFK market, Delta was down 29%, but JetBlue was up 19%. LaGuardia in June, Delta was up 32%, JetBlue was up 110%. So LaGuardia performed very well despite that it can be problematic in a delayed airport. Philadelphia was up 1%. O'Hare, Chicago was down 42%. Generally speaking, July weather was terrible, and that impacted numbers through a number of cancellations. Jet A gallons sold were down 8% in July. This was due to our self-imposed sales restrictions to preserve inventory, and up less than 1% in August. Low lev was down 18% in July, up 13% in August. Freight was down 4% in July. Freight was up 4% in July with UPS and the mail up significantly, and then Cape Air Freight and FedEx were down. We handled 21 noise calls in July. On the personnel report, we held a retirement celebration for Lenny Liebert and Linda True last week. Both are retiring after significant stints with the airport. 22 years for Lenny and 10 this time around with Linda for, I think, 23 total. I wanted to thank them for their dedication and service to the airport and the community. I also want to welcome two new hires. Darian Nangle is our new operations specialist, and Carlos Phillips is our new ground transportation coordinator. Both started on Monday, and you will see them around the airport. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions or comments for Mr. Carberg?
No, I was going to comment on the retirement party. It was great. It was very nicely done, and I met a lot of the seasonal people that were working on in the background. So thank you to Rob and Deb Cooks.
Anyone else? Thank you. So moving on to commissioners' comments, anything for future agendas or items that weren't on the agenda that wouldn't violate open meeting law? Hearing none, we'll move on to public comment. I don't see anybody in the participant list. So I would entertain a motion to go into executive session per general law, chapter 30A, section 21A, to review the executive session minutes enumerated on the agenda, and to discuss strategy with respect to litigation regarding Welsh, where the chair has determined an open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Airport Commission, not to return to open session. Is there such a motion? Mr. Cox, are you just waving goodbye?
Yeah, just waving goodbye. Just
Oh.
letting you guys know I'm going to jump on to the
Okay, HTC.
HTC meeting.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
that
Cox.
has not started yet for our petition.
Super.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there such a motion?
So
So
moved.
And second,
Second,
Ms. Topham, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
aye.
And chair votes aye. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Laz.